Imagine this. A crew of pros planning to rob a massive bank with a genius-level plan no one would ever see coming. A heist with no gunfire, no injuries, and not a single trace left behind. And the craziest part? The police had the bank surrounded. While the gang, they were chilling at home, watching the whole thing unfold on the news. Today, we're diving into one of the smartest and strangest heists in history. The job that became known as the heist of the century. Buckle up, because what you're about to hear will blow your mind, from the first minute to the last second. Let's get into it. The story starts on May 15th, 2005. That day, a man named Fernando Araujo walked into his therapist's office. He sat down and calmly said, "I want to do something that brings me back to life, that makes me feel alive again." The therapist raised an eyebrow. "And what exactly do you want to do?" Fernando replied without hesitation. "Now that I'm 43, I feel like the only thing that could really give me that feeling is robbing a bank." The therapist chuckled. "That's impossible." But Fernando, he looked him straight in the eye and said, "It's not impossible. I've actually been planning it for a while now." The conversation went on for a while, but they never really reached a conclusion. What the therapist didn't know was that Fernando wasn't joking. He was dead serious. Meanwhile, the therapist just thought he was another desperate man, looking for something, anything, to fill the void. But Fernando Araujo was no ordinary man. He was exceptionally smart. He had once worked in government paperwork and was also a talented stage actor. And when he made up his mind to pull off this heist, he dropped everything else and dedicated himself fully to planning it. It all started with a precise routine. Every day, he'd ride around the streets of Acasuso on his motorbike, scoping out banks, studying their patterns, looking for the perfect target. Until he finally landed on one, Banco Rio, one of the biggest and most well-known banks in the country. In fact, over 80% of Argentinians had their money there. But what really made it a jackpot? The private vaults. A place where clients stored their most precious valuables, gold, jewelry, diamonds, and loads of cash. With his target locked in, Fernando moved on to the next step, crafting the perfect plan. A plan so tight, there'd be zero room for error. Fernando Araujo had two choices, no in between. Option 1. Go in guns blazing, stage a full-blown armed robbery, grab whatever cash the tellers had in their drawers. But that idea? It didn't appeal to him. Why? Because by Argentine law, each drawer could only hold around $10,000, maximum. So even if he managed to hit one or two of them, it just wouldn't be worth the risk. Plus, escaping after a daytime robbery like that? Almost impossible. Police usually show up within minutes, and the whole building would be locked down in no time. Too much risk for too little reward. Not worth it. Option 2. Sneak in at night. Get to the private vaults and clean them out. That idea? Way more tempting. The loot inside could be worth millions, but the obstacles? Downright terrifying. Surveillance cameras everywhere, all connected directly to the police control room. Thermal sensors ready to pick up the slightest movement inside or near the vault. Bottom line? One wrong move and sirens start blaring, cops rush in, game over. And still, Fernando didn't give up. He started looking for a genius way to get inside that vault. Unseen, undetected, untouchable. The first idea that came to mind? Dig a tunnel. Start somewhere underground and go straight to the vault. but a tunnel like that would take months, heavy equipment, and a huge risk of being found out. Then, he thought, maybe rent a nearby property, a shop, warehouse, or house close to the bank. Start tunneling from there. But guess what? The closest buildings were about 220 meters away. That's almost insane in terms of time, money, and effort. Basically impossible. He was starting to lose hope, until a random moment changed everything. One day, while checking out an apartment near the bank with a realtor, Fernando was riding his motorcycle when he noticed something weird. The street running alongside the bank was lined with manhole covers, placed every 10 meters or so. That's when something clicked. Underneath that street ran a massive storm drain, and it passed right next to the bank. Excited, he followed the manholes until he reached the end of the drain. There he found a huge square opening, over 2.5 meters high. Below it, a wide water channel. In other words, the tunnel already existed. He didn't need a building. He didn't need to dig 200 meters. All he had to do was get into the storm drain system and walk right under the bank. And so, he did. Fernando climbed down into the storm drain and studied the entire route. From the big opening to the bank, just 160 meters. He could reach the exact spot beneath the bank in 2 minutes flat, walking underground. He told himself, "This is it. Let's do this." He went home and locked himself away for 35 straight days, sketching out the plan in painstaking detail, predicting every scenario, planning for every possible outcome. And once the plan was bulletproof, it was time for Phase 2. Build a crew. Because this wasn't the kind of job you pull off solo. The first person he picked? His old friend, Sebastian Bolster. Sebastian was an electronics and mechanical engineer, a guy who had zero ties to crime. And that's exactly what Fernando wanted. Someone clean, someone who wouldn't raise any red flags. And there was one more reason Sebastian was the perfect choice. He hated banks, especially Banco Rio. Why? Sebastian's family had lost everything when one of Argentina's major banks collapsed. They managed to scrape their money back together, only to deposit it into Banco Rio. Then, the bank froze their accounts and took their house when they couldn't keep up with loan payments. Long story short, Sebastian had been waiting for a shot at revenge. This wasn't just a lucky coincidence. This was a perfect match, a shared mission. And together, they were about to spark one of the smartest heists the world had ever seen. The first decision Araujo and Sebastian made, or rather, the leader and the engineer, was to change their names. They agreed to start calling each other by their new titles, so they'd get used to them early, especially since the team was about to grow. From that point on, Fernando Araujo became the leader. Sebastian Bolster became the engineer. And you better remember those names, because everything that happens next will be told using them. The leader and the engineer went together to scout the bank. They climbed down into the public sewer system and mapped out the exact distance to the bank's vault. They spent a full week scanning the area, analyzing every single angle. Next, the engineer took a bold step. He walked into the bank pretending to own 6 kilos of gold that he wanted to store in a private vault. A bank employee took him down to the vault and opened the door, showing him how the system worked. The engineer asked to inspect one of the safety deposit boxes for security. Meanwhile, a tiny hidden camera inside his coat was recording everything. He returned to the leader with the footage. Together, they reviewed the video, studied every corner, every detail, and began planning how to defeat each security obstacle, one by one. But then came a major problem. They needed serious funding. Specialized tools, high-grade equipment, thermal suits. This wasn't going to be cheap. That's when the third man entered the picture. The doctor. A mysterious figure. To this day, no one knows his real name or identity. A well-educated man with social status and a scientific background. But behind closed doors, he was knee-deep in all kinds of shady business. The doctor took charge of assembling the full crew. First recruit, Beto Latorim, nicknamed the Financier. A brilliant mind, master pickpocket, sleight-of-hand expert. He could rob you blind, and you'd still thank him. Smooth talker, negotiation wizard, with a rap sheet full of dark achievements. When the leader pitched him the plan, he didn't even hesitate. He told them he had a large truck he could sell to fund the operation. Now they just needed 2 more people, a skilled tunnel digger for the dangerous groundwork, and an experienced getaway driver for the escape. The doctor had someone in mind, Luis Chellens. Luis was a former member of one of Argentina's most notorious gangs. He'd served 15 years in prison on 9 different charges. A drug dealer, master thief, and brilliant actor. Even behind bars, he pulled scams, faking medical emergencies just to get a breath of freedom from a hospital window. Because of his violent nature and explosive temper, they called him the Savage. And finally, a 6th man joined. No one knew his real name or where he came from. They simply called him the Kid. And just like that, the team was complete. The leader, the engineer, the doctor, the financier, the savage, and the kid. The wild thing? They were all insanely smart. Each one was a master of his craft. For example, when the leader asked for maps of the streets surrounding the bank, it was obvious the doctor would get them, and he did. But then, the savage shocked everyone. He brought in the bank's actual blueprint. When they asked him, stunned, "Where the hell did you get this?" he just smiled and said, "Didn't we all agree from day one? No one reveals their sources, so respect the rules." The team studied the maps thoroughly and pinpointed the exact location of the vault. The plan was both simple and insane. Dig a tunnel to the vault, break in, grab everything, then sneak back out the same way. All under the cover of night. Execution phase began. They lowered digging equipment and advanced tech gear into the sewer. The digging started, from the sewer ceiling toward the vault. The distance to dig? About 30 meters. Estimated time? 2 months. Meanwhile, the engineer was working on a critical problem. How could they enter the vault without being detected by thermal sensors? The only solution was expensive but necessary. Design custom suits that could block their body heat from cameras and sensors. They built thick, heavy suits, something like astronaut gear, and bought a thermal camera to test the concept. And it worked. The sensors picked up nothing. But a new issue popped up. The suits were way too bulky. Walking in them was hard enough. Sneaking through a vault? Nearly impossible. It was like trying to pull off a heist in medieval iron armor. That's when the leader dropped a crazy idea. He said, "Why don't we just walk in through the front door and escape through the tunnel?" He explained his plan in full. They debated it for hours. And finally, they agreed. What happened next was beyond anything anyone could have imagined. After the team agreed to change the plan, walk into the bank through the front door, and escape through the tunnel, they had to ditch the thermal suits. But that meant they needed something else. Something the leader had been against from the very start. Weapons. He hated the idea, for 2 major reasons. 1, he didn't want anyone to get hurt. This job, for him, wasn't about violence. It was about feeling alive again. 2. If things went south, being armed would seriously worsen the charges they'd face. But with the new plan, there was no way around it. They needed weapons to keep control inside the bank. So the leader turned to the financier and asked him to supply the weapons. But there was one condition. They have to be weird, unique, something nobody would ever expect. You'll find out what kind of weapons he meant soon enough. The financier delivered, and when the leader saw what he brought back, he was thrilled. So thrilled, in fact, that he invited the entire crew to a fancy dinner, on his dime, to celebrate. Now it was time for the final and most sensitive phase of the plan, the escape. As we mentioned earlier, the idea was to escape through the tunnel after the heist. But a new issue came up. If they exited through the nearest manhole, just 160 meters from the bank, police would absolutely have the area locked down in minutes. So they needed a smarter plan. The leader, being the mastermind he was, had an idea. We don't use the first manhole. We keep moving through the sewer until we reach another one, 200 meters away. It's less visible and way safer. At first, the team pushed back. They argued that emerging in the open like that was way too risky, but the leader explained everything. After entering the vault, they'd fill giant bags with money and jewels, then toss those bags down into the tunnel they'd already dug. Once the job was done, they'd all slide down into the sewer. And here's where it gets wild. Waiting for them down there would be tiny escape boats they had stashed earlier. They'd use the boats to move in the opposite direction of the nearest manhole until they reached the second exit, the one they had picked in advance. Right above that manhole, an old, beat-up Volkswagen parked innocently in the street, but the car was custom-modified. It had a secret hatch in the bottom, so the crew could literally climb up from underground straight into the car, without anyone seeing a thing. The one man in charge of waiting up top and driving them out of there? The kid, the sixth member of the crew. Quiet, reliable, unknown to most. He was to floor it the second the last man was inside. They bought the right car and cut the hatch themselves in the financier's garage. The whole operation took place under the watchful eye of the financier's wife, who they all trusted completely to keep her mouth shut. While the crew handled the car setup, the engineer was working on something else, a powerful machine they nicknamed the Cannon. It was basically a massive air compressor, built specifically to bust open the locks on the safety deposit boxes, and it worked like magic. The thing could shatter a vault lock in 7 seconds flat. So now, everything was in place. The gear, the weapons, the tunnel, the boat, the escape car, the getaway driver, even the custom-built vault buster. The date was set. The plan was locked. And when the big day finally arrived, what happened next was straight-up legendary. Morning of January 13th, 2006. An old, beat-up Volkswagen pulled up in front of the bank. Out stepped 4 men in matching gray suits, black hats, and ski masks. But there was something weird about them. They all had long, blonde hair. Of course, it wasn't real. It was a trick, the leader's idea. Each man wore a blonde wig to throw off any witnesses who might later try to describe their real hair color. The 4 who entered the bank were the leader, the doctor, the enforcer, and the financier. Meanwhile, the engineer was already underground. He was deep in the sewer, crawling through the tunnel they'd dug for weeks, carrying a massive air compressor, a hammer, and some tools. His mission? Break through the wall of the vault, but don't enter until the signal was given. As soon as the crew stormed into the bank, they took everyone hostage. But here's where things got strange. Even though they acted like cold-blooded criminals, their behavior was off. They looked nervous, jittery, scared, like their plan had already failed. It was on purpose, part of the psychological game. They wanted to confuse the police and rattle the hostages. Within 15 minutes, the place was surrounded, cops everywhere. That's when the next phase began. The financier grabbed one of the hostages and walked toward the front entrance. Then, in full view of the police, he pretended to try and escape. But the second he saw the police outside, he acted terrified, panicked, and ran back inside. Now the cops and the hostages were even more convinced. These guys are freaking out. They're trapped. They don't know what to do. But then, an unexpected problem. The bank security guard, hiding in the surveillance room, was still watching everything through the cameras and feeding that info straight to the police. So the leader and the enforcer moved fast. The leader charged into the surveillance room and shouted, "Every minute you stay in here, a hostage dies!" At that exact moment, the enforcer grabbed a hostage, held a gun to her head, and shoved her right in front of the glass window, forcing the guard to surrender. The hostage begged him to cooperate, and in the end, the guard gave in and stepped out. The leader grabbed his phone and said, "Call your chief. Tell him we want to talk. We're ready to negotiate, but we want a guarantee for our lives and the lives of the hostages." The guard walked out with another hostage and told the police exactly what happened, reinforcing the illusion that the gang was desperate and ready to give up. Meanwhile, inside the vault, the leader and the doctor rushed to the back and gave the signal to the engineer. It was time. But first, they had to shut off the cameras. That way, nobody could see the real operation going down. Once the surveillance was dead, the engineer fired up the compressor. 7 seconds per lock. He cracked open the vault wall and slipped inside. They opened the big bags. The engineer brought in the cannon, their custom-built vault buster, and started smashing open the deposit boxes one after another. It was insanely fast. 7 seconds, one lock, done. Inside the vault were the leader, the doctor, the engineer. Outside, the enforcer and the financier were keeping the hostages calm and keeping eyes on the cops to buy as much time as possible. A little later, the enforcer stepped out to the lobby and signaled to the police. He wanted to talk. They handed him a phone. He told the chief, "We planned this heist, but you showed up too fast. We're scared. We don't know what to do." But the chief wasn't buying it. He noticed something strange. The enforcer was talking super calmly, sitting on a desk, feet kicked up, not a care in the world. So he asked, "You got a record?" And the enforcer said casually, "Just got out of prison. I don't care if I go back. I just don't want anyone getting hurt." Then he told the chief, "We need some time to figure out what to do. Let me talk to the crew." The police chief agreed and gave them 1 hour. Back inside, the enforcer rushed to the vault to check on progress. And what he saw? Half the vault was already empty. The money and jewelry were already packed. He grinned. "How much more time do we need?" "Give us 1 more hour," they said. When the hour was up, the enforcer called the chief again. But this time, he sounded broken. "We're ready to give up, but we want to say sorry to the hostages first. We want to share a meal with them." He requested pizza from a specific restaurant, 40 minutes away from the bank. Then came the threat. "If we don't get it, we're ending this, and we're taking everyone with us." The chief didn't want to risk a massacre, so he agreed. That bought them 40 more minutes. And during those 40 minutes, inside the vault, the crew kept working, calmly, efficiently, clearing out the last of the treasure and getting ready for the final act of their masterpiece. And just like that, the doctor rushed out of the vault and whispered to the others. It was time. The job was done. Time to vanish. Immediately, the financier ordered all the hostages to lie face down on the floor. He and the muscle stood over them, guns in hand, barking. Any sudden moves, and we shoot. Meanwhile, the leader, doctor, and engineer slipped back into the vault. The doctor and engineer descended into the sewer tunnel, waiting to receive the loot. One by one, the leader, financier, and the muscle started tossing the heavy bags full of cash and jewels down the tunnel, where the doctor and engineer were packing everything into inflatable rafts. When the last bag was in, they left a surprise behind. A large fake bomb placed right in front of the vault door. Beside it, they laid out a red cloth and neatly placed their weapons on top of it. Then, they vanished into the tunnel. At the exit, the kid was waiting. They climbed out of the sewer, jumped into the getaway car, and drove straight to the financier's house. They parked in the garage, rushed inside, and turned on the TV. And surprise, the police were still outside the bank. Clueless. Waiting for a surrender that would never come. 2 full hours passed before the chief of police finally gave the order to storm the place. He had called the bank's phone 33 times, and nobody answered. And when they broke in, they found nothing. No robbers, no hostages, no clues, just that bomb, which turned out to be a toy. And the guns, plastic, the whole thing, had been a flawless illusion, a perfectly executed plan, from A to Z. After the heist, the crew split the loot and made a vow: never contact each other again. But greed ruins everything. One night, the financier came home to find that his wife had stolen 3 full bags of cash, about 100 grand. When he confronted her, she calmly said, "That's my share. I needed a few things." They argued. She threatened to turn him in. So, he took the rest of the money and vanished. And the next day, she walked straight into a police station and spilled everything. The financier was arrested first, then the leader, the engineer, the muscle. Only the doctor and the kid got away. They fled the country, and no one's heard from them since. The actual amount stolen, still unknown. Not a single cent was recovered. The bank took the full loss and reimbursed every client out of pocket. And the punishment? Surprisingly light. Sentences ranged from 9 to 15 years. But guess what? None of them spent more than 3 years behind bars. Why? Because the public loved them. Lawyers, human rights groups, the media, everyone rallied behind them, calling them the gentle thieves who didn't hurt a soul. Eventually, their story was turned into a comedy action movie that broke box office records. And in a bizarre twist of justice, 30% of the film's profits were donated to the bank, as a way of saying sorry. Today, this heist is remembered worldwide as the heist of the century. And that's our story for today. If you enjoyed this kind of wild, unbelievable tale, you should check out the one about the man who stole half a ton of money, or the one about the devil's messenger, a true story about a killer who claimed Satan himself ordered him to kill. Both are absolutely worth your time. We'll see you again soon, in another jaw-dropping, real-life story. Until then, stay sharp.